My special guest today is Bruce Mau. His latest book is called MC24, 24 Principles for Designing Massive Change in Your Life and Work. And this is something that we all need today. Bruce, thank you for joining us. It's really a pleasure to have you as a guest.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Looking forward to it.
Thanks. So let's talk about massive change. Most people fear change. Change is disruptive, and change can cause a great deal of anxiety. But change can also be a good thing. What does massive change mean to you, Bruce?
Well, I think that if you think about where we are right now in the long sweep of history, we're facing challenges that are of an order of magnitude and complexity that we have never had to deal with. It's really a first to deal with the level of and scale of challenge that we're now confronting. What that means is that over the coming decades, and I think more and more urgently over the coming years, we will experience change. We will experience profound change in the way that we live and work. I am committed to making that change a designed outcome and not merely a kind of accidental thing that happens to us, and trying to make it something that we actually produce together, and something that we begin to guide as a transformation to a better world.
Thanks. This has been, I know, a topic for you for a long time now, and your book, which I have as well, really kind of like
there it is.
Really kind of sums up this this idea and this philosophy really well. So tell us a little bit more about your book. What was your motivation, inspiration for writing this book right now? You already had one book, Massive Change, some years ago, and now you have this book as well. What has changed in the meantime?
Well, when we did Massive Change, it was an exhibition that started in Vancouver and it went to Toronto and Chicago. And at the end of the exhibit, we had a place for people to provide comments. It got an incredible response. We broke attendance records in Vancouver and Chicago. We beat Warhol and Picasso with a design exhibition. But the one critique that really stuck with me was people said, at the end, they said, look, I'm excited. I love this. I'm on your team. I want to do this. How do I do it? And I realized then that we didn't really know how to do it. We didn't really have a method for them, except our own studio method. And about 10 years ago, I was made an Honorary Royal Designer for Industry at the RSA in London. And as part of that, they sent a group of young leaders to Chicago to meet with us. And I, showed them my work and some of the things that we've been doing. And they said, you're a really weird dude. What kind of designer are you? And I said, I'm a designer. This is what we do. And they said, well, we think of design as being defined by the product. In other words, a designer, a graphic designer does graphics, and a architect does buildings, but you're designing social movements and institutions and cities and carpets. What kind of designer is that? And I said, look, I'm a designer. That's what, that's the work that we do. And they said, how do you do it? You didn't really tell us. You showed us the results, but you didn't really describe how you do it. And I realized that they were right. I actually didn't know how we did it. That we had just evolved an organic method in the studio over 25 years of being challenged by very perplexing, increasingly complex problems, that we just developed a way to do it, and we did it kind of intuitively. And I thought, I talked to B.C. Williams, who's my partner in life and business, and I said, I don't think I don't know is a very good answer to that question. I think we should figure out what the real method is. because you can't have such consistent performance without principles. There must be principles that guide this. And that really was the start of the process to create the MC24. And I just wanted to understand, you know, of all that work, if you look back over 25 years, you know, what are the concepts that really inform a new way of working that really takes design into what we call life-centered design, which is an approach that puts life at the center and not humans. So I think the concept of human-centered design has really caused a lot of the challenges that we now face. That we put people, you know, above and before anything else, including the natural world and the ecologies that sustain us. So we began to really look at what were the methods and principles that we apply, and we ended up with 24 of them. And you know, it could have been more or less, but we ended up with 24, and that's really the kind of origin of the book. And over the last 10 years, we've been applying those principles and really testing them and workshopping them and making sure that, in fact, they are how we think and work. And you know, that I imagine that's going to continue and evolve. But it's a pretty good snapshot at the moment.
Thank you, Bruce. This is a really beautiful book, and in many ways it does sums up your both of your design philosophy and your personal design journey. I really enjoyed reading it. I also remember quite distinctively when your Massive Change book actually came out.
Uh-huh.
And I was a student there, still studying design, and heard about it that it came out, rushed to the bookstore, got it immediately, like really eagerly, kind of wanted to read and understand what was happening. And it was a very unusual book at the time. It kind of like opened up all these things that really challenged pretty much what designers do and what designers should do, and even what is design. And it was kind of like a really thought-provoking book, you know.
Yeah.
It was quite the work, and I was very pleased to see that you have decided to kind of demystify and unpack further some of these things, because many of these type of topics are still very mysterious, even for many designers, you know, who like, how should you do these things? So let's talk more about the 24 design principles. What kind of opportunities we can identify in a period of change such as the one that we are facing today?
Well, if you think about, you know, when we did Massive Change, it was organized around what we call design economies. And those are the regions of your life that are being designed or redesigned. And what we realized was that, you know, what I was trying to do was to, in some ways, do for design what Duchamp had done for art, which is to liberate it from what he called the tyranny of the eye. And so Duchamp said, you know, art is anything you can think of. It's not constrained to visual things. And he really tried to get out of the kind of trap of the visual and open it up to the rest of, you know, the rest of our sensory experience and the rest of life. And he, you know, quite famously accomplished that. That hadn't happened in designs. You know, it really was, and I think still mostly is, conceived and practiced as a visual practice. And so what we said instead is to say, let's organize around economies, the regions that are changing your life and that we live within. And I think it's such an important distinction to say, look, we live within a designed economy. I mean, imagine the number of times that you can close your eyes and open them in a space where you only see the natural world. You realize that it's practically zero. And even the few times it is happening, you're actually in a place designed for your natural experience. So if you think about national parks aren't natural. If you went into a natural national park, it would kill you. But you want to go and have a good time and be safe and have a lovely picnic. That's a designed experience. And so we said, look, that the market economy, the information economy, the movement economy, the energy economy, these are economies that are designed, and we live within those. And therefore, the quality of design is our quality of life. So if we have a poor design in the economy of energy, we have poor performance and poor quality of life. The fact that one kind of dimension of the economy of energy is clogging our climate and destroying our quality of life is a design problem. We designed it that way. And today we burn about a cubic mile of oil every year. So imagine taking a cubic mile that's a mile square and a mile high and setting it on fire. That's what we do every year. But it's become invisible. We don't really see it. But understanding that economy, I think, really led us to a way of thinking about design that was radically different than we thought about it in the past. And I think the most important dimension of it, and the reason we did the MC24, is that our argument is that we must take responsibility for the design, not about control. When I did Massive Change, a lot of people said, Bruce, you're a megalomaniac. You just want to control everything. You want to design everything. And for me, it's not about control at all. My preference is to do nothing. But it's about responsibility. What is our real responsibility? And you can see that when we fail to design, we design for failure. And all over the world, when we don't design our ecology, we destroy it. And you can see that, in fact, what we're doing now is going back to places that we did destroy and reconceiving them as ecologies again. But we're pushing it to a higher order of complexity so that we can design not only the ecology, but also the infrastructure and the amenity. So you have a much more challenging, difficult design responsibility when you take this approach.
Well, historically speaking, as you said, designers have been a part of the problem in so many ways. Overconsumption, planned obsolescence, and waste generation are some of the things that come first to my mind. In part, this has been due to the limitation of design education and lack of critical thinking skills. This is why we need to educate designers very differently today. That's what I believe. So how can we inspire a new generation of design leaders to create positive change?
That's a great question. And I think, if you look at the MC24 principles, the first one is first inspire. Design is leadership, lead by design. In other words, your responsibility as a designer is to inspire. And I think that we have to take that responsibility seriously. In our approach, we don't wait for or hope for inspiration. We take responsibility for producing it. And our first impulse is to figure out what will inspire people to change. How can we invite them into a new world and really show them that world? I don't think designers really understand how powerful they are in a political sense of being able to express a new world. Imagine a new world and visualize it. Simon Sinek talks about a vision being visual. Right? And designers have the capacity to do that. And one of the things that we realized was that if you think about what designers do as a common denominator, what are all designers doing? We're all envisioning a future. We're all imagining, no matter how banal it is, it's like how even the worst designer is producing a future. They're producing a way for people to work every day to make things. They're producing the assembly line of the product that they're imagining. They're producing a way for people to interact. They're producing a future. And I think that understanding that we have responsibility for that future and that we have to begin to understand what the real implications of it are, I think is really central to this new way of working that we call life-centered design.
What will be an example that you can share with us that has worked for you in the past when it comes to inspiring designers to do better?
Well, I had an experience myself, quite by accident. I did a little manifesto called the Incomplete Manifesto for Growth. And it was done in a very light way. I'd been working then for, I don't know, maybe 15 years. And my wife's sister was really pestering me to contribute to a little magazine that she was doing. And I was trying to avoid it as much as possible. And she just was unrelenting. And so finally I said, look, there's something that's going on in my own practice. And I'm kind of looking at, how do you sustain a creative life for the long term? Like, how do you, it's easy to be a hot designer for a season, but to really have a creative life for the whole time, there are a lot of forces that are working against that. And, how do you sustain it? And so I wrote a little manifesto called that Incomplete Manifesto for Growth. And it had a really surprising uptake. I had no idea, but it's been used in hundreds of courses and classes and translated into dozens of languages. And I realized that the manifesto is a really powerful technique, and we do it for almost all of our projects. And it gives us a way. It's very different than a project brief. And the brief, if you think about the project brief in design, we've been trying to get it smaller and tighter. Everyone wants a kind of tight brief. They want it reduced as much as possible. And we've been going the opposite direction to say we should think of the brief as complex and difficult as we can. We really need to take that, that notion of a discrete object has to end. I worked with Sanford Quinter on a book called Incorporations, one of the volumes of Zone that we produced. And Incorporations had for me, a very influential concept, which was there is no discrete thing. There's no discrete entity that isn't composed of other things and isn't itself incorporated into higher level systems. So the idea of that discrete thing as a problem we can solve, I think, is one of the afflictions of design. And we have to go the other direction to say, let's try to understand that object. If we're going to make an object of some kind, let's try to understand that in its implications in terms of what it consumes, what becomes that thing, and then what are the implications in the larger ecosystem that it produces. And if you take the example of the car, right, we solved the problem of the car beautifully. Like, we made extraordinary cars for the last 100 years. What we didn't solve is the ecology of the car. We didn't think it was our responsibility. We didn't say, hey, you know what? I'm going to make 1 billion of these things. And when I have 1 billion of them, it's going to change everything. It's going to reorganize the world. We didn't think about that as part of our design responsibility. And I think if we're going to have a future on the planet, that's how we're going to think about design. We're going to think about the things that we do as consuming of energy and resources and producing impacts in the world, positive and negative. And I think the more that we can make a kind of comprehensive brief, the better chance we have of actually thinking that way and producing the impacts that we want and really taking responsibility for those impacts as part of our work.
It's very interesting. I like that how you brought the car, because that has been really a problem in many ways. And there were some very interesting kind of developments when the car started becoming popular. Ford, for example, was really interesting proponent in looking the future, Henry Ford. not only in terms of like the manufacturing of the car, but he also realized that people need roads as well if they're kind of having cars. And when I was doing some research into this area, he was the co-investor of the first highway in America to connect, like coast to coast and so on, because he realized that if people don't have where to go with the cars, they're not going to be buying as many cars. And we don't see that type of thinking anymore, as much. So that is very interesting.
Well, I think that you're seeing, we are seeing, I think, really innovative ecosystem thinking in the best, the really highest order design businesses. Like if you look at what Elon Musk is doing, right? Elon Musk is making a new car, but his real project is an energy ecosystem. So the battery for the car is also the battery for your home. And the solar panels are now roofing tiles on your roof. And I remember when he bought the roofing tile business, people said, like, why is my car company on my roof? And most people would, it's understandable that most investors would think that. But the way that he is seeing it is it's one connected, interwoven network of energy and implications. And the more that we can actually convert to cleaner energy, the more value we add to the world.
Yeah, we've done some work like that in my school on that front, specifically to our future mobility center. We work with all the major automotive manufacturers, and we kind of do this like a large strategies in some cases. So and all of these type of strategies that we do, they're future focused. So they always happen like 20, 30 years from now, how the world will look. So one of these things was, okay, if you're moving more to autonomous vehicles, if you're moving more to electric cars, hydrogen-powered cars, and so on, what could happen to the existing infrastructure? For example, the current petrol stations that we have, all around, because people are not going to be using them so much and all that. So what's going to happen to all of that? And that is a massive infrastructure that has been built over a period of a century. So you can't just, it's not good just to kind of like let it decay. So how you can rethink and reuse that, and what kind of role can these big automotive manufacturers play in kind of reimagining this infrastructure and connecting it with these new technologies and so on, and using these petrol stations, what would have been normally, just like a place to refuel your car. They could become these lounges, and they could become this type of, other recharging stations and so on. So it was how to move the entire infrastructure further rather than abandoning and rethinking something completely different, because that is not very productive. It's not really sustainable if you just constantly have to dump something and come up with something else. So for me, it's always a very interesting topic, kind of thinking in those terms. Another thing that is very interesting for me is that you have actually chosen manifesto concept. That is not very common in design sense, but historically speaking, manifestos are very powerful tools for inspiring change. What was your inspiration for that, essentially? What did you use as a model?
I mean, it really came out of my experience with the Incomplete Manifesto, but we started to use it in our workshops. And we asked people to do a 6-minute manifesto. And it was so powerful as an experience that, almost always one or more people were crying. And we actually reduced it to a 3-minute manifesto because we realized that people actually finished early. People know what they want in their life. And what we found that was really quite extraordinary is just how much beauty is sitting right next to you. You had it was incredible. I mean, we had situations where it's like Bob in shipping is a poet. We had no idea. The guy's incredible. And we would see these images of people and their ambition and they're caring for the world and they're caring for their community. their caring for the ecology would come out in a way that was really quite extraordinary. And it really became something that we almost always do with our projects and with our workshops or clients, or when we're working on things. And we found it a very effective way of articulating an ambition and of sharing that ambition in a way that is collective commitment. And so I work with the Freeman Company, and we wrote the Freeman Manifesto together as a group, and it really articulates our vision for the future of the company and its responsibility to the community and to the people that we serve and the people we employ. And it really is a way of articulating our kind of highest purpose and our highest ambition as a design goal that we can then break down into pieces and execute the pieces.
So, what does new normal today mean for you?
Well, I think the concept, the principle of design the new normal for me was about shifting our perspective from the kind of special case, which, frankly, almost all designers want the special case. They want, like, I'm a designer, I want to do something awesome. And I want to do that special thing that no one else can do, that is, beautiful. I can sign it. It's like an awesome thing. But when you say, look, the real design problem is a new normal, it fundamentally changes what we're trying to accomplish. Because so long as equitable, intelligent sustainability is a special case, we're doomed. Right? So long as intelligence and a kind of sustainable way of life is something only for radicals and pioneers and heroic champions, we're doomed. We have to make it not hard, not challenging, not difficult. We have to make it the easiest, the most fun, exciting, sexy thing to do. And that really changes what designers, what most designers define as their work, as their product. Because now the good news is that all the best qualities of design for the special case can come into play in accomplishing this change. But you really have to kind of reorient it and use them in different ways. So if you think about beauty is a competitive idea. It's an idea that I find really fascinating, that we have almost no discussion of beauty in the design profession. Like if I was an architecture student and I walked into an architecture school today and I put up my project and I said, I did it because it's beautiful, I would get an F. I'd get fired. And I think that's a real shortcoming in our imagination. Because yes, there are a million forms of beauty. Yes, they are shifting culturally. We think of beauty differently in different places and cultures. But the common denominator is that beauty is the highest form of cultural attainment. And we will spend more for beauty. We'll go the distance. We'll suffer pain for beauty. What we will do for beauty is really unlimited. And yet we don't really think of it as a methodology. And so I talk to my clients about a beauty strategy. What is your beauty strategy? And if you take, most companies, no concept. Apple had a beauty strategy. Apple said, we are going to put beauty into the product, to the extent that, Jobs rejected motherboards that didn't look good. So he would look at a motherboard, which is purely technical. I mean, it's, you know, it's just an arrangement of objects to perform functions. He would look at those and say, it's not beautiful, take it back. He wanted beauty and order in the very kind of essence of the product. Now, if you take Apple today and you took beauty out of it, you'd have a reasonably good technology company. With beauty, you have a company worth $2 trillion, the most valuable company in the history of humankind. And I don't understand why business leaders everywhere don't realize that beauty is an effective competitive idea.
I think it's this whole subjectivity that surrounds it. Otherwise, you're very, very correct. There has been this universal pursuit on beauty since all times. Renaissance has been, you know, the Renaissance and the classical kind of notions of antiquity have been preoccupied with the idea of beauty and this constant pursuit of beauty. But we also see that beauty is a construct that changes over time. And even within the same culture, beauty takes different shapes and different forms as different norms change. So it's it's a very difficult kind of thing to pinpoint. It's like, what is beauty? For Steve Jobs, beauty is one thing. For his engineers, it's a completely different thing, you know? And it's who is in the position of the power to decide what beauty is that what beauty becomes in a way. It's a very interesting thing.
But if you think about, like, you know, Buckminster Fuller said, I don't really think about beauty very much, but I know if the result isn't beautiful, it's probably not right. I mean, there's a kind of order in beauty that you know, it's true that we can't precisely quantify it, but what we can do is say there are dimensions of beauty, and that's what we've done in MC24, to say, look, there are 13 dimensions of beauty that you can understand and integrate into your thinking. It doesn't give you a master's in design, but we need people to actually understand the dimensions of beauty to be able to apply them in our work. So, for instance, I mean, one of the best ones for me is contrast. Right? Contrast is a classical concept of beauty, and so we look at the work of ARP and you know, all kinds of people who are you know, really kind of masters of contrast. But I relate it to my clients, every one of which is looking to stand out against a noisy background. Right? So not one client I've ever worked with was trying to disappear. Like, they're all trying to be in the foreground against the kind of noise of the market. That's contrast. Right? They're all trying to produce contrast one way or another. And part of what I do for them is to help them do that. And I think that, you know, if you look at, you know, the work of Kara Walker, I mean, she uses contrast in such a beautiful way that that really, you know, tells a story and makes it part of a history of culture. And I think that, you know, that I mean, for me, it just suggests that there is a big opportunity to think about beauty differently.
It's interesting, the relationship between beauty and practicality. In some ways, some things are beautiful because they're easy to use, they're simple, they're very streamlined. In some cases, the idea of beauty takes away from, you know, from that thing. And here is one of the perfect examples. Exceptionally beautiful. Okay.
Useless.
It's a design icon.
Unless you want to sponsor.
It's not a design icon. You know, it is an absolute design icon.
Yeah.
It's and the funny thing is that if a design student, let's say of ours, our design student here, designs something like that in product design, we have to fail that student.
Yeah.
By default, simply because it has kind of developed a product that is flawed on multiple levels. It kind of breaks all these kind of notions of what a product design should be. But it's no doubt beautiful object. I never used it, by the way, in a kitchen. It only sits on the shelf.
And this is a beauty on such a kind of extraordinary scale. Right? So this is the skeleton of a sea creature. Right?
Wow.
And this creature produces its skeleton of glass. Right? So you can kind of see how crazy beautiful that is.
This is incredible.
Right?
Never seen anything like this.
It produces a skeleton of glass, right, that is produced at the temperature of its own body. And I once did a kind of a session, a presentation with Janine Benyus, who developed the Biomimicry Guild, and I said, when at the opening, she came for the opening of Massive Change in Vancouver, and I asked Janine, what would be different if we could design the way nature does? And she said, well, if you look at the things on the table here, we had glasses and things, and she said, nature doesn't do it the way that we do it. Nature can make glass at room temperature, and it can grow things. And we use what she called heat, beat, and treat. and she said, in the future, we're going to grow our things, and we're going to grow the things that we need, because we're going to understand how life works, and we're going to use, the billions of years of design intelligence built into the natural world, and we're going to convert that and make that accessible to designers everywhere. And I do think that's what's going on. And for me, the kind of like when I see something like this, it's visually beautiful, and it's got a kind of beautiful intelligence in its conception that is just so powerful and really undeniable.
Bruce, can you share with us some of your favorite examples of successful design-led social change projects?
Well, for me, the project that still is one of my favorite things I've ever been involved in is a project called Guatemala. And it started with a letter from the Minister of Education of Guatemala, and she wrote me a letter. And in the letter, basically explained that she was part of a group of citizens who were working to imagine a better future for Guatemala, and that their research and work had led them to me, and that they would be interested in talking to me about being part of this program. And the letter arrived on my desk, and it had no return address or phone number, or I guess in Guatemala, everyone knows how to get in touch with the Minister of Education. And so I asked my assistant, I said, no doubt these folks are going to try to contact us, and please get in touch with me wherever I am. So a few days later, we talked, and they explained that they had 36 years of civil war, and that their folks had, their people had lost the ability to dream. And I could hardly imagine that having the ability to dream could be lost. But obviously I'd not lived through 36 years of civil war. And what they explained was that during that time, the future was really wiped out. Like the idea of thinking of the future was practically eliminated to just think about survival and now and today. And so they said when we talk to our kids and ask them what they want to be when they grow up, they don't have an answer. They don't think they are going to grow up. At least it's not in their kind of imagination. And so they asked me if we could help them. And a few days later, it happened very, very quickly. A few days later, we were on our way with our family to Guatemala. The first day we arrived, they took me to meet the vice president, and they said, "This is Bruce, and he's going to redesign Guatemala. And I said, no. I never said anything like that. And I'm not going to do that. You're going to do it. You're the ones who are going to redesign Guatemala. I can help you apply design to that problem. I can give you strategic tools and methods, and I can accelerate your work. But in the end, it's going to be you. And if anyone who isn't Guatemalan offers to do that, you should run away from them. And so they said, okay, well, we want you to help us change the name of the country. I thought, wow, you guys are really big thinkers. Like, why would you want to do that? And they explained that, the place was called Guate by the indigenous folks. And when the Spanish arrived, they hated it. So they didn't like it there. And so they named it Guatemala, which is bad Guate, and in Spanish. And so they said, how would you like to wake up in the United States, a bad place? And I said, well, you really got a point. I mean, maybe we should think about that. And in the process, we started the work with them, and in the process, we added an extra A, and it became Guateamala, which is the love of Guate. And that started a movement, and that was really our design project, was to design the Amala movement and build what we call the foundations of life. In other words, if you think about what we think of as the culture of life, it rests on foundations that were built by our forebears, some of whom paid with their life. That we have a culture of freedom and a culture of entrepreneurship and a culture of justice and a culture of education. These foundations of the culture of life are absolutely central to our well-being, to our success, and many of them we're hardly even conscious of. In America, we talk endlessly about the kind of entrepreneurial bootstrapping, and we don't realize that's happening on the top of a deep foundation that is accessible to some people, right? And others can't get on the foundation. We're very selective about who gets access to entrepreneurial opportunity. And so we said, look, we want to build the culture of life. You had 36 years of the culture of death. You can't simply turn it off and turn it, you don't just turn off death and turn on life. People, we met with a woman who was working with a family where every male in the extended family, in the whole community, had been killed just before the end of the war. And it was so traumatic that they couldn't even talk about it amongst themselves. Only the women and female children that were left just could not face it. And you realize that that's still very, those experiences are still in the culture. They're still alive. And so if you're going to build a culture of life, you've got years and decades of work to really invest in the culture of life and figure out what that means in this context, and really help people understand those ideas and how to contribute to it and how to collectively move this forward. And it was, for me, one of the best things that I've done with my life. And we just started again and kind of next phase of the work in the coming months that we'll be doing. And I think it's just I think it really shows that design can have a kind of impact on a really dramatic scale.
It's a very noble type of project, and very few designers can ever actually be in a position to inspire a change on such a large scale. and in such an interesting and engaging way. How many people on your team work with you on that?
Oh, it was actually a small group. It was only 4 or 5 people, but a very big group in Guatemala. So we were really working on strategy, communication, kind of designing the foundation of the project, and then they were executing. And it happened when we were doing Massive Change, and they actually came to the show in Vancouver when it opened, and they were very inspired. And I said, look, just steal it, like rip it off as much as you can. Do your version of it in Guatemala. And they did an exhibition to launch the project that was an exhibition of the 10 foundations of the culture of life. Our goal at the time was to get 1,000 volunteers. We thought if we could have 1,000 people committed to the movement, we could really make an impact. And by the end of a 10-day exhibit, we had over 20,000 people signed up. And this is in a country where, for the last 36 years, if you signed your name on things, if your name was on a list, black SUVs showed up and you were never seen again. So the idea that people would actually make that public commitment and join a movement for social justice and for to improve Guatemala for all Guatemalans was for me really profound. And I remember when we presented the project in Los Angeles, because LA is the second biggest Guatemalan city in the world. And we knew that if the people of LA, the Guatemalans of Los Angeles, did not support the project, we would never succeed, because they're so powerful and influential in the culture. And when I presented it in LA, I went to this place. It was extraordinary. It was like Guatemala in every way. Like it smelled, tasted, looked. It was uncanny how they had simply built a piece of Guatemala there. And I presented the project, and before I presented, the leader of Los Angeles, I think the Consul General is the title, of the leader of the Guatemalan community there, the kind of mayor. He went before me and he said, as everyone here knows, Guatemala suffers from apartheid. And I have to say that I was really shocked. I was like, what did he say? Did that guy just say that? Yes, he did. He did. And you realize that, for the indigenous people of Guatemala, they are cut out of the deal. They are not in the conversation. And if we're going to have a positive future, in the same way that we need to do here, our strength is our diversity. Our strength, our potential is our culture and our diversity of culture, our all of our people. And we need the contribution of everyone if we're going to accomplish the things that we need to solve. And all the things, all the pathologies that we're experiencing now, the social pathologies of racism and sexism and anti-gay bigotry and anti-environmentalism and anti-science, all of these social pathologies really trace back to a lack of empathy, lack of caring, an inability to actually understand someone else's experience. And I think that's where design really plays a huge role. Design, at its core, is empathetic. Our job is to understand someone else's problem. And so designers have developed a very, very acute capacity for empathy if they're successful. They develop ways of listening to people, ways of actually hearing other people and allowing voices we talk about how obligation to dissent is critical to a design culture, that we need honesty, that without honesty, I could be working on the wrong problem. And so that kind of commitment, I think, to empathy and caring as the core, DNA of design, and education, as the foundation of that, I think is really where we need to be taking this country.
Thank you so much for sharing this very inspiring example, Bruce. What would be your advice for homegrown design activists, for individuals who want to create movements in places without, let's say, government support, without possibility of having funding and other things? How can design activists initiate grassroots movements such as the one that you were helping Guatemala?
Well, I think that it's never been, I wouldn't say easier, but it's never been more possible to participate in change. I think that the connectedness that we have today can allow us to join forces and overcome some of the most vexing problems that mankind has ever faced. Now, sadly, as we've seen recently, we can also use that connectedness to gather against, to join forces against things. And I think that the urgency for designers to use their superpowers to gather for things, to gather for an equitable world, to gather for a sustainable world, to gather for access and education and possibility, I think has never been greater, and it's really super urgent that we all do that as much as we humanly can.
Great. I also wanted to ask you about data and quantification. Let's change a little bit the direction in terms of to the science of design. How can we measure change inspired by design?
Well, there are, one of the principles is quantify and visualize. And I think it's such an important dimension of excellent work. In other words, we can only change what we measure. Right? We can only know that we're changing things when we measure it. And so figuring out how to measure things is really important to the future of design. Figuring out how to measure the right things and have that capacity as part of the way that we work is really critical. And then to visualize it. And this is, again, where I think designers have a huge role to play, because a lot of the data exists. There's more data than there's ever been in human history. And in 2 years, it will double. And so we have incredible quantification of the world. But taking that data from a spreadsheet to an image that can be shared instantly and collectively, is a really profound transformation that designers have the skills and talent to do. And so I think the more that we can actually apply that concept of quantify and visualize, that we can quantify even qualitative things. We feature a man named Bruce Buena de Mesquita, who is able to apply quantification to things that seemed like they were qualities, not quantities. But he was able to show a very simple method to say, I can show you, as a percentage, how good dinner was last night. And I can actually, and it's a brilliant, very simple thing to say, let's start with, was it the worst dinner ever? Was it the best dinner ever? Probably not. Somewhere in the middle. Okay, we already have, a bracket. now we're going to talk about, was it worse than 50% of all dinners? and he can work it through piece by piece. And what you realize is that we can actually quantify quality. And that means that we can change the way that we work, and we can understand the things that are really important, that they're going to be able to change behavior and transform things.
I love it. I think it's very important for us to have an ability to measure the value that design can create. And I think that this has been a problem in the field of design for, in the past. I think now we are far more conscious about research and evidence-based design than we ever were in the past. And I think that kind of ability to measure the value that we create as designers, it's incredibly important, and that this is something that will allow us to scale for impact.
Mm-hmm. When we did Massive Change, we found an extraordinary quotation by Arnold Toynbee, who said that he was a historian, British historian, who wrote a 20-volume history of the world. And he said, in the long sweep of history, the 20th century won't be remembered either for technology and innovation or for violence and conflict. That those two big themes, which, it's hard to imagine anything else at this point. Like when you look back at the 20th century, you think, well, those are the two big ideas. He said, no, it's actually going to be remembered as an age in which we dared to imagine the welfare of the entire human race as a practical objective. And when I read that, I thought, wow, that's the biggest idea I've ever heard. That's what I think I'm committed to. I wouldn't have put it in that kind of grand way. But, I work every day to make the world a better place. As you said earlier, my first company was called Public Good. And it wasn't, I wasn't particularly politically savvy. I just wanted my work to be committed to things that made life better for people. And I wasn't interested in doing things that were, apparently not doing that. And it's, there's lots of, when you get into that problem, it becomes very complex. But, we had a very fairly simple idea about that. But what I saw when we began to research that idea, like, is it true that the 20th century is principally about the welfare of the whole human race? I realized in order to do that, we must actually be able to quantify the welfare. We must be able to see the world in a new way that hadn't happened before in history. And so we tried to look for projects that were producing an image of the world, in some dimension. And we found them. We found projects all over the world, very advanced scientific projects that were gathering the data of one kind or another, and assembling an image of the world so that we could actually see it. And once you see it, you can design it. Right? So once you see that portrait of the world, you can improve it. You can say, oh, that's not good. This part of it isn't good. How can we address that? And that's what we saw. We saw that people all over the world were able to actually begin to understand the global scale and begin to work at that scale. And that's really critical, because what happens when you're designing things, right? It's easy to design a single thing. But if 8 billion people decide that they want that thing, what happens? What are the implications? What do we have to dig out of the earth for that to happen? What do we have to cut down for that to happen? What are we destroying for that to happen? And how does that, what does that mean long term? And so for me, the concept of scale is really critical in the local. In other words, in your practice, you have to understand, if I build this way, what does that mean? We're working on an urban project, and a reconceiving of urban life. And we discover through the research that we're going to build half again our entire planet. So imagine you can draw a line around the world, like that cuts the world in half, half the people on one side, half on the other. We're going to build again one half of the whole planet to accommodate the coming billions. We can't do it in the way that we did it in the past. It'll destroy us. And so we have to reconceive that product. Now, when you're building your building, it doesn't, it's hard to leap from that building to half of the world. But that's really what we have to do. We have to think about scale in that way. And we need to add 9 zeros to everything that you're doing.
So what would you say should be the guiding principles that we need to keep in mind in order to design a more sustainable world?
Well, I would say the MC24, but specifically.
But unpack a little bit on some, maybe just like a, as a brief advice, let's say, to designers interested in sustainability.
Right. Okay. So
it should be in sustainability, by the way. So let's say as a general advice to designers.
Specifically, I would start with, we're not separate from or above nature, and that is a Copernican revolution in understanding our place in the world. In other words, for several thousand years, we've believed that in the West that nature was given to us. Right? It was given to us, and that we had dominion over it. And we were not part of nature. We were a special case. Right? So we were above and separate from the natural world. And what we realize is that, through science, is that we're almost identical to the animals, some of the animals that we think of as beneath us. And that, in fact, we are just one form of life. I had when we worked on the Museum of Biodiversity in Panama City, I had the awesome experience of going into the jungle with E.O. Wilson, who's maybe the best life scientist working today. And he worked, he helped us with our project in Panama. And he explained that there is only one thing on the planet. It's life. And life has an experiment going with form. And we are one of those forms. But over 99% of all the experiments are extinct. And we will be too at some point. And if we want our passing to elicit something other than a round of applause by the rest of life, we need to change our way of understanding and really come to the scientific understanding of our role in the world. And once you begin to think that way, you realize, I need to design differently. I need to do my business differently. I need to conduct my government differently. I need to work differently, because I need to make what I do synthetic, sympathetic and continuous with the natural world, so that I'm not against nature. I mean, if you think about the 3 archetypes of narrative, it's man against himself, man against man, and man against nature. The only one of them, first of all, it's all men. Secondly, it's only one of them is not narcissistic. And that one is against nature. And so we need new stories that place us in nature in a new way that is sympathetic. And I have to say that on that, in this kind of, in my search, my journey with MC24 to what I call life-centered design, I met some extraordinary folks in my hometown in Northern Ontario, Northern Canada. I'm on the board of the architecture school there, the MacEwan School of Architecture, which is the first new school of architecture in Canada in 40 years. And it's a tricultural project with French, English, and Indigenous leaders. And so, being on the board, I got, a quite extraordinary experience of going up there a couple times a year to work with these folks. And I realized that their cosmology is fundamentally different than mine, or the one that I had at least. In other words, they put life at the center, not humans. So they start from the premise that we are life, and life is the thing. Life is at the core, and we come to life along with all the other life forms. So we're not a special case. We're not somehow exempt. Our role really is to understand life and to be part of it, and understand the role that we play and the opportunity that we have. But when you do that, you so change the way that you think. Like, so for instance, the school has a forest as part of the school. And one of the projects that the students do is they go into the forest with an indigenous elder, and they find a tree, a birch tree that is ready to give up its bark. And the elder, cuts a slice in that tree, and the bark literally kind of pops off as one piece. And they proceed to make a birch bark canoe in the way that it's been made for thousands of years.
That's amazing.
And the material they use to seal it, when there are joins in the birch bark, they use a material made from bear fat, spruce gum, and ash from the fire. And that material will survive 100-degree heat and -40 winter and not crack or peel. And when that canoe is done, when it's broken or finished, it's no longer useful, it goes entirely back to the earth. And it's a level of sophistication that designers can hardly, conceive of. And we need to conceive of it. I mean, our responsibility is to change the way that we are in the world and to make the changes necessary and to design the new normal. That's
an amazing example, Bruce. Thank you so much for that. You've had a remarkable career. It's very inspiring.
So far, so good. I feel like I'm just getting started.
Well, Bruce, thank you so much for joining me today, and I really enjoyed the conversation with you. It was really inspirational. We've been exchanging also emails and stuff and so on. So I do really enjoy sharing.
Likewise, Gjoko. Really a pleasure.
So thank you so much for your time and for everything.
Thank you.